No doctor could get that boy to respond. No specialist could make him look up. For 4 years, the child lived like a shadow. No smile, no words, no direct gaze at anyone, not even his own father, a millionaire who once believed money could heal every wound. Then amid the bustling anonymity of Atlanta Airport, where people passed one another in silence and haste, that boy suddenly lifted a violin and began to play. Not because anyone told him to, not because anyone asked, but because of a single person standing nearby, a black waitress whose name no one knew, without title or power, and the father, witnessing the first look his son ever gave to another person, didn't know whether to feel relieved or angry. It was the very moment he realized, perhaps all this time, he had protected his child in a way that left him no way out. All right, my dear viewers, get ready for a story that will leave you amazed. Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe, and leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always exciting to see people joining us from all around the world. Leah Thompson had just finished wiping down the escalator area at the west side of the domestic terminal when her phone chimed, signaling the end of her lunch break. She hastily stuffed the half-eaten sandwich into the pocket of her uniform coat. Her thin gloves still smelled of cleaning chemicals, her shoulders were damp with dirty water, and a dull ache throbbed along her spine after her third consecutive night shift. She had grown accustomed to that persistent fatigue. It felt like an uninvited companion, silent, relentless, unwelcome, but ever-present. She hadn't meant to linger in Concourse B. No one cleaned there without orders. Yet Leah's footsteps suddenly faltered. A fragile sound threaded through the blare of airport announcements and the rumble of wheeled suitcases. Not canned background music, but living sound, a single drawn-out note, trembling yet clear, like an emotional whisper amid meaningless noise. A melody she knew all too well, once hummed by her brother during his struggles with schizophrenia. Whenever he lifted his violin, the world seemed to soften, recede from the whispers in his mind. Leah had called that tune their sanctuary. She turned around. In the fluorescent bright concourse, amid suits, dress shirts, and lopsided rolling bags, a boy stood perfectly still. He wore a dark velvet jacket, his hair neatly combed, his leather shoes gleaming. At first glance, he looked bound for a formal event, an opera, a gala. But the violin on his shoulder told a different story. His hand trembled ever so slightly, wrist tilting with the bow's arc, and his eyes, what made Leah root herself to the spot, looked not at anyone, but into an invisible space ahead, as if conversing with something deep within. Not with fear, nor for show, but with utter honesty. Leah did not move. She dared not shatter that delicate moment. Then by some strange reflex, she raised her left hand, curved her fingers, and began tapping the rhythm to the melody, just as she used to sit beside her brother as a child, quietly keeping time so he wouldn't lose himself between the music in his head and the notes on his violin. The melody flowed on like warm water, slow, reflective, then surging toward a crescendo that made passing travelers pause. Leah swallowed hard. She didn't know why, but her vision blurred. There was something in that boy, achingly familiar, not the music itself, but the loneliness pouring from each note, like a child calling the world back, using the only language he still believed in. Then a cold voice sliced the air. "Who gave my son permission to play violin in the airport?" The music stopped. No applause, no startled breaths, just a silent fracture. A tall man approached, his calmness bordering on chilling. A gray suit, a firm jaw, eyes devoid of emotion. Without introduction, Leah knew who he was. Jacob Callahan, the real estate billionaire behind a chain of luxury resorts spanning the East Coast. But it wasn't his fame that caught her attention. It was the way he regarded his son, not with anger or pride, but as if facing something he could not control. "Who are you?" he asked, his tone flat and official. Leah inhaled, uncertain how to reply. Then in a low, measured voice, she said, I just heard the music, and I started. Jacob said nothing. He turned to his son. Benjamin still stood frozen, his bow hanging at his side, but his gaze unwavering. The boy looked at Leah. No words. Yet in that moment, the three of them understood. This had just begun.
Welcome to 30 Millionaire Stories, where success meets solitude, and every story heals a hidden wound. Subscribe and discover the heart behind the fortune.
Benjamin Callahan was once the child whose smile could melt even the hardest hearts in boardroom meetings. He used to chatter about superheroes in the middle of negotiations, doodle on million-dollar contracts, and be forgiven with a single innocent look. But all of that stopped on his 7th birthday, the day his mother departed as suddenly as she had entered Jacob's life. Her death was neither loud nor left clear traces. Yet it silenced Benjamin. No crying, no screaming, not a single tear, just complete stillness, as if his inner world had been locked away behind a door whose key was gone forever. Jacob Callahan tried everything, from top therapy centers in Seattle to speech specialists in Boston, from acupuncture to hypnosis, from music therapy to meditation. But the boy remained mute, no reaction, no sustained eye contact. And then the father began to accept. Perhaps a part of his son died with his wife, the part that listened, felt, and trusted another. Benjamin became a schedule, a regimented routine, a special education timetable, a private security detail, a lavish cage stocked with everything except freedom. And then there was Leah. No professional credentials, no special equipment, no official clearance, just a small woman with knowing eyes and hands accustomed to dipping into buckets of cold water during night shifts. Yet, when she stood there, amid the afternoon foot traffic and subtle urgings to clear the concourse, by doing something so simple, placing her hands together, curling her fingers, tapping a slow rhythm, like an invisible conductor guiding a symphony long asleep, Benjamin responded. He did not look at her, but his playing grew clearer, stronger, different. It was no longer aimless background notes. It became a dialogue. Leah recognized it instantly, not because she studied music therapy, but because she once lived with another Benjamin, her own brother, developmentally delayed and prone to outbursts, who would soothe her with a silent lullaby whenever their parents' fights grew too loud. Then, she would tap her hand just like that, as their mother once did, as an unseen nerve connecting the two of them in a world that understood nothing. Now, 10 years later, in Atlanta's airport, that same thread appeared again, this time linking her to a boy who never uttered her name, never met her gaze, but somehow understood. Music is more than language. It is the last survival instinct when everything else collapses. It is the voice when words fail, the refuge when no one else is safe enough to stay. And for Benjamin, the violin was the final place he allowed himself to truly exist. Leah did not know what she was doing. She never imagined that standing there and tapping a beat would become part of someone's healing journey. But in that moment, all theory dissolved. She only had her heart, and her heart somehow beat in sync with that boy's. Jacob had witnessed hundreds of wordless therapy sessions, but never had he seen his son respond. Standing at a distance, he dared not step forward, perhaps for fear of shattering that fragile moment, or perhaps because he was afraid. Afraid that a complete stranger, a woman who was neither his ex-wife nor a doctor nor a family member, could touch a part of his son that he himself had long since lost. The next morning, Leah was summoned to the airport's HR office. She had never been there before, not out of fear, but simply because she had no reason to. She was the silent worker, never late, never in anyone's way, leaving behind nothing but spotless floors at the end of each shift. But this time was different. She was reprimanded for being in an unauthorized location, trespassing into the VIP waiting area, and unauthorized contact with a special passenger. Everything was delivered in a very polite, by-the-book tone, accompanied by a formal written warning. Leah lowered her head, offering no defense. She understood. She had indeed crossed a boundary. Yet in her heart, she felt not guilt, but regret. Regret that she might never see Benjamin again. But fate did not seem to like such early endings. Just 3 hours later, while wiping down the second-floor corridor, Leah heard the soft pull of violin on strings emanating from the staff break room. My own break room, a room that should have been locked. She slowed her steps. Her heart skipped an unusual beat. She gently pushed open the door. Benjamin stood there, alone. The violin perched on his shoulder, his back slightly hunched forward, as though he had waited for her all morning. No one spoke. Leah did not ask how the boy had slipped into a staff-only area, nor did she wonder why no one had noticed him. She simply approached, sat on a plastic chair in the corner, placed her hands on her lap, and began tapping out a quiet rhythm. The boy played a strange piece, unlike any classical work she had ever heard. It was unfinished. Fragmented phrases, hesitations, extended notes, as if he were feeling his way through an unfamiliar forest. Yet Leah understood. This was not a performance. It was storytelling. He was speaking with the one language the world had never taught him, and she somehow could hear it. From that day on, nearly every midday, Leah found Benjamin tucked away in some hidden corner of the airport. The seldom-used storage room, an abandoned corridor, sometimes just behind the old event hall stage curtain. No one guided him, no one alerted her, yet he arrived, always on time and always with his violin. And Leah, no matter how exhausted she was, no matter how harshly she'd been reprimanded, always sat down and tapped. They never spoke, yet there was never silence between them. Each piece of music was a dialogue. Some days Benjamin played fast and driving, as if fleeing something. Leah matched his tempo, then gradually slowed, and he slowed in turn. Other days he would begin with a very high melody, then abruptly shift to a low, lullaby-like refrain. Leah would close her eyes, curve her hands into a circle, like an embrace. He'd glance at her, then repeat that section 3 times as if affirming, yes, this is it. Jacob did not know, or perhaps he did but chose not to intervene. Deep down, he might have wrestled between his role as a father who wanted to control everything and a man who realized his son was connecting with the world in a way he could not command. Leah wasn't even sure she was doing the right thing. But each time she saw Benjamin step into the room, stand patiently waiting for her, his face no longer cold but filled with anticipation, all the warnings, all the boundaries, all the rules suddenly felt very small. Not because she wanted to break the regulations, but because sometimes there are rules written to protect people from harm. Yet there are moments when the heart's own moral code stands higher than any written law. Dear viewers, take a moment to relax or grab a drink, then stay tuned for the surprising turns ahead. Comment 1 if you're enjoying this story so we know you're still here. The first video appeared quietly. It was recorded on a passenger's phone while waiting for a flight delayed by 3 hours in Concourse B. The filmer had no intention of becoming an internet hero. She simply saw a boy playing violin beside a cleaning lady who was tapping her hands in time, 2 unlikely souls from opposite worlds, yet perfectly in sync in a way that defied explanation. Within 48 hours, the clip had spread across every platform. A boy, once diagnosed as never recoverable, was now hailed as the symbol of the return of hope. That phrase was echoed again and again in countless articles, in brief TikTok captions, and even in the opening of an NBC morning news segment. But what made the video a phenomenon was not the music. It was the moment after he stopped playing, when the boy turned to look at the black woman beside him and gently touched her hand. No words, no smile, just a steady gaze lasting a few seconds. And to viewers, it felt sacred, a wordless miracle. To the public, it was inspiration. to major brands and opportunity. 1 week later, emails began pouring into Callahan Group's office. MedTech companies wanted to sponsor a neural recovery campaign called Operation Benjamin. A major media house proposed a documentary. Jacob's strategic partners suggested a grand annual gala, bigger than ever, under the theme, Healing Through Music. They wanted Benjamin on stage with his violin under spotlights, surrounded by applause. To the PR team, it was the perfect campaign. A real story, real characters, genuine emotion. And above all, exactly the moment to stoke compassion in an increasingly cold market. Jacob listened as they laid out their vision, tapping his fingers on the table. For a moment, he saw the portrait they were painting. A child stepping into the light, waving to the world. A successful father moved to tears, millions tuning in via live stream, and the Callahan Group logo emblazoned over the swelling soundtrack. Perhaps he should agree. Perhaps this could be Benjamin's first time as a beacon rather than a shadow. Perhaps the world needed this story. But then he looked again, not toward the media, but down an airport corridor, where a boy once stood beside a nameless cleaning woman, playing the very first notes with his trembling hands. He didn't see a stage. He saw fragility and truth. The next day, Leah happened to pass by the conference room, where invitations were being printed, stage models erected, speeches drafted. She paused before the event plan. No one asked her opinion. No one needed her signature. Yet she quietly whispered, "This is not consent. It's a new voice, just finding its words. If you smother it under spotlights, it will fall silent forever." Jacob said nothing. But an hour later, the meeting was canceled. The gala postponed indefinitely. Apology emails were sent in silence. No explanations, no justifications. Just a decision. And for the first time in his career, managing billions of dollars, Jacob Callahan did not choose the spotlight. He chose silence, not out of fear, but because he understood some new voices must be protected like seeds, under shade in stillness, and with the deepest respect. That day's meeting began like any other. No greeting, no prior arrangement, no background music. Yet something in the air felt different, though no one spoke of it. Leah sensed an unusual slowness in every movement Benjamin made, in the way he hesitated and lingered on each bow stroke longer than usual, as if weighing something hard to name. She continued, tapping her hand in time. Steady and unhurried, not to lead, but simply to let him know she was still there. As always, Benjamin drew a short melody and then paused, longer than normal. He bowed his head, avoiding anyone's gaze, his shoulders trembling slightly. Leah remained silent. She knew that sometimes waiting is the only thing you must not rush. Then, in a silence as thin as a thread, Benjamin set his violin down. She thought he would walk away, but he did not leave. He turned his head, and for the first time his eyes found hers. Not distant, not recoiling, but truly looking, as if he had just pierced through a thick fog to recognize something that had been there all along. She said nothing, no question, no call. She only gave a slight nod to say she was still ready to listen, even if there were no words to hear. Benjamin's lips moved. A very small gesture, but enough to make everything inside Leah contract. He formed the motion again, once more, and then, in a voice so soft it seemed to come not from his throat, but straight from his heart, he whispered 2 words. "Miss Leah." She held her breath. No tears fell, no dramatic reaction like in touching movie scenes. All her emotions sank deep rather than overflowing, spreading warmth into every corner of her mind. It was not surprise, but a feeling of rightness, as if this were the moment she had long awaited, though she never knew exactly what she was waiting for. She did not reply with words. She only leaned ever so slightly toward him, so slowly, like an unvoiced thank you. The door behind them creaked. Jacob stood there. He did not step in immediately. His gaze left his son only briefly before shifting to Leah. Not the look of an examiner, but of someone who had just witnessed something he dared not believe was real. He asked nothing, offered no acknowledgement, but when he stepped into the room and stood before them, both Leah and Benjamin knew the moment that had unfolded here could not be denied. It needed no record, no sharing, only preservation. Jacob looked at his son. His eyes were no longer cold or distant as before. Instead, they brimmed with what he had once hidden behind discipline, the desire for closeness, unspoken remorse, and the fragile hope he had never dared to feel. He turned back to Leah, and for the first time he nodded to her, not a polite gesture, but as if to say, "Thank you for seeing what I could not." Something within him had just fallen away, but not pride, rather the shell that made him think he could control love with success. He realized at last, some things only become possible when you step back and let others move forward. And Benjamin, with those two words spoken aloud, did more than name the girl who had silently stood by him. He was making a choice. For the first time, not through music, but with a true voice. Concourse at Atlanta Airport, once an anonymous transit point amid hurried journeys, is now alive with music. Not canned background tunes, but living melodies that truly touch the heart. Jacob Callahan didn't call it a charity event. He didn't brand it with his company's logo. He simply erected a small stage, a place where children with special circumstances are free to make music, without expectation, without performance. The music isn't for display, it's to exist and to be heard. No one imagined that a CEO once so cold he made partners uneasy at the table would become someone who patiently listens to children plucking imperfect notes. But Jacob is different now. He isn't trying to prove anything. He just wants to understand, just as he once wished to be understood. For Leah, nothing returned to the way it was. She left her airport job, no longer hauling buckets and mopping floors on night shifts. But she didn't chase fame as many assumed. She earned a scholarship in music therapy, not for her grades, but because of a video capturing how she sat in silence, tapping along with a child's unspoken melody. They call it empathic rhythm. Leah simply thinks it's listening. Benjamin still speaks little, but he no longer remains silent. He composes music, not within academic structure, not for recording. Just small snippets, sometimes only a few bars, which he writes by hand and sends in envelopes to Leah. The first person who taught him that language doesn't begin with sound, but with connection. One afternoon, waiting for her flight back to school, Leah opened a new letter. Thin paper, blue ink, handwriting still unpolished. Inside were just a few lines. "Thank you for being my song when I didn't know how to write the words. I will not be silent again. Love you, Miss Leah. Ben." She folded the paper against her chest. No tears, no laughter, only a growing warmth. Not from emotion, but from certainty. That boy now stands firmly in his own world. Jacob is no longer the man governed by schedules and reports. He began coming home earlier. He asks more questions. He stays quiet more often. Not because he has nothing to say, but because he understands. Sometimes presence is the greatest gift a father can give. He doesn't need Benjamin to say, "I love you, Dad." No grand holidays or pre-printed cards. All he needs is one small, genuine moment, unexpectedly given. One evening, while clearing up after a small concert, Benjamin approached. No violin, no letter, just one sentence. Short but enough to rewrite Jacob's life. "I'm home, Dad." Jacob did not reply at once. His throat tightened, not from emotion, but because no words were needed. Only a look exchanged, full of trust and affirmation. "Yes, and you have found your voice," and that was enough. No red carpet, no applause, no fairy tale ending required. For happiness isn't a destination. It's a new lease on life, opened by a moment when someone dares to speak first and someone else dares to listen. Some children are silent not because they don't want to speak, but because they wait for the world to listen the right way. And some adults, like Jacob, believe they control everything until they realize true love isn't about teaching a child what to say, but allowing them to speak their truth. The story of Leah, Benjamin, and Jacob doesn't end with stages, wealth, or fame. It ends with understanding, quietly, honestly, and deeply. And perhaps within each of us, there is a little Benjamin waiting for someone to reach out, not with words, but with presence. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment sharing how you feel. Hit like, subscribe, and share this video with someone in need of hope, because sometimes one story can open up a whole new life.